Hi, and welcome back to this series, Waveform 9 Quickstart. We're going to go over MIDI recording. We started this in the last video with the setup of the MIDI device. I'm using the CME X key as a keyboard controller for this series. And we're going to get started and do a little bit more and go a little bit more into how the recording for MIDI works in Waveform in version 9. So the first thing we're going to do is show you how to name the track. So to name the track, we just click on the track name right here. There's two ways to do this. One is to go to Properties and click in Properties and name the track here, which I'll call Keys. That's one way. There's also a keyboard shortcut available in Settings. So if you go to the Settings into the keyboard shortcuts and you look at Rename, if you look up Rename, you'll find Rename Track. This is very handy. It's not assigned to F12 by default, but I like to assign it to F12. And once you've done that, then you can click on the name of a track and hit F12 or whatever you decide to call it and rename it in place. So that's a great shortcut. So we'll call this Keys. Now we have this set up. It's still set up with Collective. I've got Collective set up as the instrument. I've got X key assigned as my input. So to get ready to do MIDI recording, just like we did in the last video, you choose your MIDI controller as the input, and you need to assign some virtual instrument. I've got Collective set up, and I'm using the MKS20 electric piano patch if you want to do the same thing that I'm doing right here. Now I'm going to lower the tempo a little bit, and we can do that by clicking right where it says BPM down in the transport master section here, and then edit this. I'm just going to slow it down to 100. And I'm going to turn on the click. You can turn on the click right here, over also in the master section buttons. And you can check the click properties in the menu area. So here you see click track. I'm going to open that up and check the pre-record count-in length. So I have a 1 bar count-in. You can also see the click track is on right here. Click only during recording is turned off, and otherwise it looks like we're pretty much good to go with that. We can rewind using return to 0, which is the home key, and we're ready to go. I'll do the click and I'll play a few chords here to record. Now, before I do that, I'm going to click on the input because the record settings for MIDI appear in Properties when you click that input, and you'll see the merge modes, or the various actions here, allow different modes of MIDI recording. The most common is to do this first option, which is merge newly recorded MIDI into existing clips. And that's mostly what you're probably going to want to use as you get started. If it's not already selected, it will be by default. And then you can either hit the R key to start recording, or in the transport, click the record button. So I'll do that right now, and I'll play in a few chords. And I just hit spacebar to stop recording, hit home again to rewind. Now you can see kind of the MIDI data is in there. To see the full MIDI data, you can expand this by just grabbing the edge of the track and expanding till you start to see the notes. Now you can see the chords stacked up. Because I played with the click, they're roughly aligned. You can see I got a little bit ahead of the bar line here on this one. So that's the basic MIDI recording mode. Now if I wanted to add to this, and I'm in this merge mode, I can just add to it. So I'm going to go back through and add a C note. I played kind of a bum note in here. I can edit that by just grabbing that note and move it up. I'll just leave it as a C. So I'm going to go back and add a bass note to this. I'll just rewind. I'll zoom out slightly with the up arrow key. And I'm going to play again, and you'll see that I can merge the notes in. I'll hit R to start this time. the space bar to stop. And if I scroll up a little bit, you'll see that those notes are in there. So in the merge mode, it will just add additional notes to the clip. So as you loop through, this is kind of good for drum programming too, because you could build up, put in a kick, come back around, put in a snare, or something like that. Once you've got these in here, of course, you can edit these notes. If you want to make slight adjustments to them, you can drag them around. I'm not going to get into detailed editing in this video, but it's just good to be aware that that's the value of MIDI recording, is that you can edit the notes and fix your recording and enhance it in a later step. Another interesting thing about that overdub is that I can undo it. So if I use the undo button, which is down here, you can see I can take out those changes, including that entire recording, or redo to put them back in. The keyboard shortcut for that is Command-Z to undo and Command-Y to redo. So you can see I can redo the recording and that little edit that I made using those keyboard shortcuts or using these buttons. Also, if you want to tighten up this performance, you can also just select all these notes and use one of the quantize options, like quantize note start times to the nearest beat or to the nearest half beat. I'll just quantize to the nearest beat, and you can see it pushes all of my timing over and fixes it like that. Now I'm going to click back onto the input, and you'll see the other actions. Like I said, you'll probably want to use this, but you can also do overlay clips. What overlay clips will do is actually create another MIDI clip that will be on top of the existing one. I personally never use that mode because I don't like it. I think it's confusing when you have them overlaid on top of each other and they're both playing. So I really don't like to use that. There is also replace existing clips with newly recorded clips. You may want to use that sometimes. And what that does is basically it will kind of erase and replace the clip as you record a new one. So say you wanted to splice in a couple of new chords at the beginning of this, go to the beginning, use this mode, I'll go into record and I'll just play a couple of these chords and then stop. Like that. And what it does is it actually creates a new clip and it pushes the other clip over out of the way. If you pull this back and use the trim handle, you'll see that all the notes for that original clip are still there. It's just gradually pushing it out of the way. I'll undo that to get it back to this point. So it's an interesting mode that you might want to use. Personally, I would delete the clip and basically replay it. But you do have some options here if you'd like to experiment with those. There's also a live monitoring mode where it doesn't actually record. It's kind of like if you're using Waveform as a kind of just as a virtual instrument and you don't really intend to record. I just leave it and merge newly recorded MIDI into existing clips, and I just leave it at that for the most part. Now I want to show you input quantize, so I'm going to undo all of this stuff. So you can quantize both the note start and end times using quantize, and it will dynamically quantize it, meaning when you're finished playing, it will correct it right away. So I'm going to quantize to one beat, play this in again. Now this quantizes both the note start and the note length. I would say this is typically better for drum programming, where you have one-shot type events, but it can be useful for this as well if you're doing pads or other sustained chords and you want a really nice tight rhythm on both the start and the end. So here's how that works. You click on the input and then select quantize. This is one beat. Half beat would be quantizing to an eighth note, assuming 4/4 timing. So don't be confused that you want to use eighth if you want to quantize to an eighth note. A lot of the aspects of waveform, you actually look at beat division. So one beat would be one beat. One half beat is the same thing as basically an eighth note. And if you wanted to quantize to 16ths, then you'd choose this 1/4 beat. A little bit confusing. Once you get the hang of it, it's not that difficult. I'll set it at one beat. I'll play in and you'll see that it will correct my timing as I record. So I'm going to hit R to start recording and I'll play this in again. So I'll position the cursor before that clip playback, and you'll hear, relative to the click, that it perfectly corrected the timing. So that's kind of how the input quantize works. I'll turn that back off, set that back to none. So that's an introduction to MIDI recording and how the record modes work, and a little bit on input quantizing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in another video very soon.